I would like to invite Sandra Regina Gattolin, who holds a master's and a PhD in applied linguistics from the State University of Campinas, and developed her postdoctorate in the Department of Modern Letters and in the Faculty of Philosophy, Letters and Human Sciences at the University of São Paulo, focusing on critical literacy and continuing education for language teachers. She's currently an associate professor at the Department of Languages and Literature at the Federal University of São Carlos in São Paulo state in Brazil. And her research interests are concerned with critical language education, foreign language teacher training, foreign language assessment, and critical literacies. For the session named, "Who is Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf?" A reflection on the myths that haunt young learners' EFL assessment. Please, everyone, welcome Sandra Gattolin. Sandra, the stage is yours. Pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you and Gladys in special for the invitation and the opportunity to be here for the first time to talk to your audience. Thank you very much. My talk is entitled, "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf? A reflection on the myths that haunt young learners' EFL assessment." Yes, and why did I give this title to my talk? Because not only when we focus on young learners' assessment, but it seems that when you talk about assessment in general, and especially in classroom assessment, something very bad occurs. Yeah, so people are afraid of being assessed. People are not, teachers are not secure, are not sometimes aware of what is to be assessed. So assessment in general generates a big concern, yes, both for students and also for teachers. And that's why I gave this title to my talk, because I myself, after many years of study and a long period of practice, don't think it's that assessment and the big bad wolf can be compared, yeah, but we'll talk about this, and I'll bring some information, and I would like to talk afterwards. I would like to talk to the audience so that we can discuss a little bit about this title. So I start by contextualizing children's learning of foreign languages in Brazil. Yeah. During the last years, we can see an increase of this area in Brazilian elementary education, because I think it's very similar to what happens in Hungary, as our colleague has just told us, that they start from the age 10. And in Brazil, we don't have children till the age of 10 do not have the right to study English or any other foreign language officially. But in the recent years, there has been an increase, and even public schools have been having the opportunity to include foreign languages, and not all the foreign languages, but English specifically, to their children. Some schools, even some public schools, start before they are in the basic education, even when they are in kindergarten. Yeah, so this has happened, and this is very good, because not only wealthy children have the right to learn a foreign language, have the right to learn English since early, since very young. But every children, everybody has this right. So this is just to show a picture of what has been happening with this area in Brazil in the recent years. Yes. But what are the challenges? And I think when you talk about children learning a foreign language, teachers assessing foreign languages, teachers assessing children's foreign language, we are talking about challenges. Everything is very challenging. Why? Because this new trend, yes, the fact that we nowadays have English since the basic education, this impact has a great impact on teacher education. Why? Because in Brazil, I don't know, yes, it would be very interesting to know what it's like in Hungary, for example, but in Brazil, who are these teachers? Who teaches English to our students? It's not the same teacher who teaches the other contents to them. So we have an English teacher to teach English to these children. And this English teacher, in general, is not a person, is not a professional who was educated to teach children. This person is generally a professional who was educated to teach children from, or teenagers, yes, from 12 or 11, 12 years old on. So this has been a problem because these teachers, they know very well how to teach a foreign language. Yes, they know the language, they know about methodologies, they know about teaching a foreign language, but they don't know the child. Yes, some of them, many of them, even though another course, so that they are more familiar with children's development, but not everybody do that. Yeah, so this is not mandatory as well. So we have people who are teaching children, but who sometimes don't know very well the audience, the person they are teaching. And this has a great impact because, as our colleague has just said, children are very special. They want attention. They have different needs, different characteristics. So it is very important that teachers know these characteristics, or they are familiar with these characteristics, with these new needs and new expectations as well. So this is one impact. Another impact is the lack of official guidelines. Yeah, because we don't have any documents which give orientations to teachers and coordinators about what is to be taught, how the language is to be taught, not what is to be taught, but what can be done in English language, in English classes, which are focused on children. So there's a lack of these official guidelines, a lack of instructional materials. Well, in fact, we have many instructional materials, but I think, according to what teachers have told us, these materials do not match students' needs, students' expectations. So we can say that there's a lack of materials, and if we have teachers who are not prepared or are not educated to teach children, yes, if we have English teachers who are not prepared or who are not educated to teach these children, if we have no official guidelines, if we have poor instructional materials, yes, if we have a lack of knowledge on what to do and how to do things in class, of course, you have a great impact on assessment. Yes, so that's what teachers have told us, that they have many doubts about what to do in class, what to teach, how to teach, and the challenge is even bigger, is greater when they talk about assessment. Yeah, here about children's EFL and the process of teaching, learning, assessing. Yeah, so nowadays, children have, not only children, but students in general, children and teenagers have specific and contemporary needs. So according to these needs and these expectations reflect changes which happen in society. Yeah. So what are teachers, or especially in bilingual contexts, teachers have adopted an approach which is focused on content and language integrated. Yeah, so the integration of content and language. Okay, so which is called CLIU. This is very popular in bilingual contexts, but this is not adopted in public schools. So there is a problem here, yes, which is concerned with the methodology, the approach which is used in class, and also this approach and these different needs and different expectations reflect another view of language. Yes, if some time ago, language was seen as a system, and as a system, we were able to teach language chunks independently from meaning. Nowadays, we see language as a social practice. So what do we intend to teach our children? We intend to teach a language which they can use socially, as which they can use to do things. And this, the challenge is becoming even greater. Yes, the more we see this, the needs and everything which is happening in contemporary education, we see that the role of English language cannot be different. We cannot teach, for example, in Brazil, we cannot teach English differently from the way we teach Portuguese. If we teach Portuguese as a social practice, yes, for students to use it as a social practice, English is to be taught the same way. Yes, so when we have this content and language integrated learning, yes, in which language is seen as a social practice, and as a consequence, we can match specific and contemporary needs, then come many questions. So what to teach, what to assess, how, and this how refers to how to teach, how to assess. And specifically, talking specifically about assessment, many teachers even do not only ask themselves how to assess, but also why to assess. And even worse, is there a need to assess? do we really need to assess children? Why? So what we have here, it's impossible, yes, trying to answer this question. Why do we have to teach or to assess children? We have to assess children because we teach them, they learn, and they deserve to be assessed. We need to assess them in order to know what they are learning, what are we are teaching, what changes are needed in the process, because assessment shows teachers not only students' results, but also teachers' results. Yeah, so assessment shows teachers what the next phase will be. Yeah, because we have a plan since the beginning of the course. We have a plan, but this plan is can be modified according to the results that students show in their assessment. So here we have teaching, learning, and assessment are together. They are not separate. We teach and assess. They learn, we assess. So assessment does not come at the end of the process. Assess comes together with teaching, with learning. So every time, for this reason, Mikolov said that feedback is to be given immediately, because we do not wait to assess to assess at the end of the process. We assess all the time. We assess continuously, and continuously we give the feedback. Yes. And why do we assess? We assess because we want to learn. We need to have an idea of the results of what children and students in general are learning. Yes. What am I doing as a teacher? Yes, the adjustments which are needed to be done in my planning. So, and what is this assessment? Okay, we have this image here on the right, shows what a test is. When we have a product assessment, for example, yes, I'll talk about this process and product the next slide. For this reason, I won't talk much more about it right now. But when we prepare a test, what is it a test? What is this test about? Yeah, so this circle, this white circle, means all the content we work during a period. The test is just one part, or the test is a very small part of that content, which is selected by the teacher, and why not by the students, yes, together with the students, to be able to assess, okay? Because we cannot assess everything which was intended to be taught. Yeah, so we assess continuously, yes, as I said before, and we also assess at the end of a period. And at the end of a period, I can use a test which will be a small part of all the content which was worked with those students. Okay. Now, to have an idea of all these concepts, all these information, these pieces of information which I have just mentioned, teachers are expected to have a kind of literacy, which is called language assessment literacy. And in this quotation here, I used Tonelli and Quevedo Camargo's paper, from 2018. Yes, and they say, in their paper, they say, according to Stegens and Popham, the concept of assessment literacy refers to an understanding of the principles governing solid, well-informed, sorry, there's a mistake here, well-informed and fair assessment. Yes, for Kuhn, Trudy, and Alhamley, implicit in this definition is that assessment literate teachers have the know-how and understanding needed to assess their students effectively and maximize learning. So what do we have here? We have lots of concepts here. For example, principles governing solid, well-informed, and fair assessment. What is a solid assessment? A well-informed assessment, a fair assessment. Yeah, so if teachers are not literate, if teachers are not, do not study this in their courses, so how can they assess children? How can they assess their students if they are not aware of these concepts? Yeah, so what's a fair assessment? So a lot of knowledge which is needed for teachers to assess in a fair way. Yes. Continuing with some quotations from the same article, the same paper, Tonelli and Quevedo Camargo also state that, according to Stegens, well-informed and fair assessment is characterized by 5 elements. It should originate from and serve clear purposes. It should originate from and reflect clear and appropriate performance objectives. It should be based on an appropriate method. It should depict students' achievement properly. It should, it should exercise control over all relevant sources of bias and distortions. So here, again, we see that Stegens tried to tried to explain what he or she, understand as well-informed and fair assessment. But we still have some other concepts here. Yeah, so to assess fairly and well, we need to have very clear objectives. We need to, this assessment must reflect what is done or what the teacher does during their classes. This assessment must also reflect or must also inform teachers on the use that they want their students to do of the language they are learning. So the objectives for the assessment are the same objectives for teaching. Of course, they must reflect, they must reflect what was planned. Yeah, so it's not fair, for example, to teach students by using a clear approach and in the test ask students to transform sentences into affirmative sentences into negative and interrogative, for example, or ask them to fill in the blanks. So the approaches must be the same. Yes, the same approach which embases teaching practice must also embase assessment practice. Yeah. And when we talk about assessment in general, we talk about several types of language assessment. Yes, we have proficiency tests or proficiency assessment and other kinds of assessment. But in this talk, I'm focusing on learning-oriented assessment. I'm talking about classroom assessment. Yes. And when you talk about classroom assessment, we can think of assessment as a process and assessment as a product, according to Scaramucci. So what's assessment as a process? Assessment as a process has to do with what I have already mentioned. When we assess every step, yes, everything which is done by the student, yes, so that when they have a product assessment, they can show, or this assessment can reflect the achievement they had during their learning, yes? Because if we wait to assess at the end of a month or at the end of 2 months, we can have a big surprise, yes? And at a time in which we cannot go back 2 months ago. So if we have this assessment as a process, so we can see every change which is needed to be done, and assessment as a product, the product will be a reflection of what the process was. Yeah. So let's continue. Yes, I would talk about assessment for learning and assessment of learning, but our colleague has just done it, so I'll go for the next. Yeah, and yes, and when I talk about assessment for learning, yes, these two questions, what and how, are very important. Yes, are very important. Why? Because my feedback or the results children offer in their assessments, in their tests, help me improve their learning, improve my teaching as well. But how do we do it? Yes, what do we assess, and especially how do we do it? And I think that this statement by Nikolov summarizes very well. She says that this is an area where there is a need and a lot of room for further work. Yes, so unfortunately, we still have a lot to research, a lot to do, or we need many more studies to bring these results so that we can say this is to be done, or this can be done like this, or this can be done like that. This works in this context, that works in a different context. So we don't have these answers. Yeah, so I think that the answers will never be ready for us, but something which can shed light on our assessment practice. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. And this is, that's why I think that I chose this statement, and I agree that we haven't talked a lot about this. Yeah, in Brazil, in our meetings, in our conferences, we have a lot of conferences together with some colleagues who study teacher or children's foreign language, in teacher education, in also in assessment. But what's the focus? The focus is on teacher education, especially. Yeah, so we have a lot of information about, for example, what is to be done? What is expected from the language and literature courses? Yes, if teachers are not, if there is no course specifically to prepare, to educate foreign language teachers to teach children, this has to be done because it's an increasing area. Yeah, we need these teachers, and we know that we don't have these teachers so far. Yeah, so the responses, the results of these lots of research are concerned with these, with different things. Yes, with these political policies and teacher education and assessment as well, but also focus on teacher education and results from the classroom, from inside the classroom, practical results we are still lacking. Yeah, so I don't mean that they do not exist. They do exist. They exist in many different practices, but they are everywhere. Yes, we know because we talk with a lot of teachers. Some of them tell us about what they do when they are assessing, when they are teaching, but we still need this literature. We still need to have this information so that we can spread, we can find this information more easily, so that we can read, we can be informed, to act, to go to our classroom and do things, and are more aware of how to do things. Is the time? Okay. Okay, so, and what do teachers report? Yes, what do they say? They, well, I think I have I have just talked about this, about their reports. And besides formal instruments, what can we suggest? Yeah, so why did I bring this slide? Yes, talking about or showing you portfolios, self-assessment, peer assessment, because last year I was invited to take part in a course, especialização, in a postgraduate course for kindergarten teachers. Yes, for teachers of children from 1 to 5, 6 years old. And one of the models one of the courses I gave was about assessment. And their reaction was very bad when I first met them and started talking about assessment. If they thought that assessment was necessary, if they had how, yes, I asked them how they register their results, or yeah, everything which was concerned with assessment. And I could notice that many of them were very uncomfortable to talk about that. Not because they didn't know what to do, but because they did not agree. They did not think it was fair to assess children. So, and then I said, but we are always being assessed. You are assessing because when you're, how can you know if your students can can do better drawings, for example. So you assess their drawings, you assess what they say, because at the beginning of the year, they could not express themselves very well, but now they can. So there are many aspects in their development which can be assessed, which must be assessed, and which you assess for sure. Yes, but they were not, they had never thought of that, they had never thought of that as assessment. Why? Because when we say assessment, for many people, not only teachers, for many people, and this is the result of our education, of a traditional education. When you talk about assessment, what do we think of? We think of tests. Yeah, so assessment is a synonym of testing, which is not true. Yes, assessment is very different from testing. So their idea was that I was suggesting them to test their students, to prepare specific instruments to assess their students. And they were very uncomfortable about that. Yeah, so for this reason, and then we continued, of course, and then we read and we talked a lot about ways of assessing and ways of registering students and children's results, children's performance. Yes, and for this reason, I brought here these three kinds of, or three ways of assessing students, which are the portfolios, which all those teachers used to do, but they did not recognize their portfolios as an instrument, an assessment instrument, self-assessment, and peer assessment. Yes, I won't talk more about self-assessment and peer assessment because Nikolov has just done it. Yes, but just to show, yes, how important these, which are called alternative assessment by some authors, some theorists, and because teachers in general or people in general don't think they are assessing themselves when they are assessing their students when they are doing this. Yeah, so these are practices which in their way of understanding have nothing to do with assessment. And after sharing with you all these information, these pieces of information, yes, I have here three pictures of the big bad wolf. Yes, I think this first picture, is the bad wolf as we see him when we are not conscious, when we are not literate, when we don't know what assessment is all about. So we see assessment as a monster, yes, as something which comes to punish us, yes, which comes to classify, which comes to or which is necessary just to grade students so that they can continue their study or not. Yeah. So this is an old way of looking at assessment. Yes. In the second picture, we see that assessment, and we had there the bad wolf. Yes, assessment does not scare so much anymore. So students if teachers are literate, students have no reason to be afraid of assessment. Assessment is part of the process. Assessment is part of the learning, part of the teaching. Yeah, so it is natural. Assessment is in the classroom, but it's also outside the classroom. Assessment is everywhere. So children, teenagers, and everybody have no reason to be afraid of assessment. And at the end, the third picture shows us that the big bad wolf is not that bad. Yes, he is good. And it will depend on the way he's taken to class. Yes, on the way that teachers use assessment. Teachers show their students what assessment is, and the way which students can do their tests, which is nothing very strange, very different from what they do every day. This is fair assessment. It's an extra activity very similar to the one which the students are already familiar with. So if assessment is seen and is taken to class this way, there's no bad wolf anymore, as there is no bad wolf in the stories as well. And I thank you, and I'm open to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. It was a pleasure to have you here with us today. Well, first of all, thank you for the metaphor of assessment as the big bad wolf. Lots and lots of teachers, they do see assessment as a threat, as an enemy, as a threat, because the fear of being assessed, the power of assessment for students and understanding how the learning process is going through, the teaching and learning process, sometimes this is a threat for the teachers because it's a reflection of their own work. So most teachers, sometimes they are afraid of assessing learners or what to do with assessment, and afraid of bringing assessment to their everyday routine, just because it might open their fragilities sometimes, because they see that what will the school think if they discover that my students, they are having trouble, they are still not there yet, and etc. So how do you, as a college professor, how do you change teachers' beliefs and teachers' minds in showing them that assessment is beneficial and not an enemy?
Well, I think one way of doing that is assessing in a different way. When students are assessed differently, when students have this kind of assessment, they learn that there's no reason to be afraid of. But what happens? So you asked me how to teach teachers to be, how to assess differently. Yes, but they are exposed to several kinds of assessment, several teachers' beliefs. Yes, of course, there are those teachers who still ask them to read 8 books, and on the day of the assessment, they will choose one book to be the one which is will be assessed, which the test will be about. Yeah, so they have different kinds of assessment. I think that the better way, the best way for me to show students is by reading, by showing them good experiences, good assessment practices, and showing and assessing them in a different way, because it's no use to say that assessment can be this, can be done like this or like that, and do something completely different. As I think.
All right, and who do you think, Sandra, is more afraid of assessment? The learners, the students with the tests and etc., or the teachers?
I think both of them, because students, yes, there's no need to talk more about students being afraid of tests, but teachers as well, because I think that Nicola said something which was very important, that she realized that she had made some mistakes. Yes, so she used errors, she didn't use mistake, if I'm not mistaken, but I think it's very important for us teachers to be aware that we are there with our students. We are there and we are taking risks as well. Not only students are taking risks when they are learning a language. We as teachers are always taking risks, and we are always there to learn with those students. So it's natural, for me it's very natural to realize that, oh, yes, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It's not like that. Yeah, so let's change. Let me hear, what do you have to say? Yes, I think these are some strategies which can be used. I think that, but sometimes when teachers, especially when teachers are younger, yes, and maybe they are not so self-confident, maybe they are a bit, they don't usually assume their, not mistakes, but their weak practices, let's say. Yes.
Their weaknesses in general, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I liked very much that you began your talk contextualizing a little bit the Brazilian bilingual education scenario and etc. So I have a question for you regarding the appropriate background to teachers in these contexts. In Brazil, to be a teacher and teach at a regular school, teachers should go through a teacher course called licenciatura in specific areas like sciences, maths, history, and etc. Okay, some people, very few people, they're also additionally fluent in English. Okay, great. In these courses, in our licenciaturas, we theoretically learn methodology, teaching practices, pedagogy, and etc. on how to handle teaching those contents. My question for you is, a teacher being fluent in English and going through licenciatura, do you think this is enough for a teacher to teach in a bilingual context, to deliver that content in English? Do you think that whatever we learn in Brazil, in our licenciaturas, is transferable to be taught in a second language like English, for example? Being fluent and licenciatura, is it enough to make a good bilingual teacher in a bilingual context?
Let me see if I understood, or if I understood correctly. You are asking me if a person who has a good level of proficiency, who is fluent in English, and who has undergone letras, for example, language and literature,
Not
in the case of the
necessarily.
language.
It could be, for example, teachers teaching in a bilingual context, teachers teaching history, teaching science, teaching maths. So not necessarily the English teacher per se, but a bilingual teacher, a teacher teaching content through English. Do you think that just the initial teaching course, the university course, plus being fluent in English, do you think this is enough for this teacher to be able to carry out a good work teaching science in English, history in English? Is it enough, in your opinion, to transfer?
That's a very difficult question for me to answer. If you ask me specifically about English, it's easier, but I can only give you my opinion. Yes,
okay, sure.
I don't. Yeah, that's what we have. Yeah. Well, I want to believe that. I don't know, it's very difficult, yes, because learning the language, knowing the language, yeah, for example, a person, a history teacher, yes, so of course, he masters his or her content, yes, and he also knows the language, but
Perfect.
which language did he or she learn? Yeah.
Portuguese, first language, L1. Portuguese, probably, in our scenario here.
Okay, but to teach in a bilingual context, he or she are expected to know the target language. Yeah.
Bingo. Bingo. So can we just simplify that being fluent in English and be a specialist in your specific area, is it enough to teach your own content in English? Is there anything else that should also be considered? Is this teacher lacking anything?
Well, it's again my opinion. I think something is lacking. Yes, because it's not so natural. Yeah. But I cannot say yes or no, because I have no information, official information about this. It's just an opinion. Yeah.
Sure. Your opinion is what is important for us today. Just would like to know your thoughts on it.
Yes, for example, because we have a different situation. We have, for example, I have some students who studied to be English teachers. They are working in bilingual contexts, teaching other contents. So I think I know, because we are always talking, I know that this is a very difficult task for them, because this is something they were not prepared to. They were prepared to teach the language. Yes, even though if we think of Cleo, for example, this is a challenge as well, because it's not the language itself, and it cannot be the language itself. I don't agree. Yes. But it's difficult. But in these cases, they work together with other teachers. So they share their plans, they share their knowledges, and they teach each other, they help each other. I think this is a way for this to be done. alone, it's very difficult, either for the language teacher, both for the language teacher and the content teacher.
All right, thank you, Sandra, very much for your attendance in our event. It was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you, everybody. See you there.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.